The move was supposed to be a fresh start, a place of peace and safety after years of intense trial work and the bitter custody battle that left me the sole guardian of my 5-year-old daughter, Ava. I'd chosen this suburban neighborhood for its reputation: quiet streets, good schools, and neighbors who smiled at you when they passed. But behind those freshly painted fences and manicured lawns was a system so rotten with self-importance it made a courtroom look humble. The HOA ruled the neighborhood like a miniature dictatorship, and at the center of that regime was the woman everyone called Karen, not just in name but in spirit, tone, and behavior. She was blonde, sharp-angled, always in navy blue pantsuits, and she treated any deviation from her unwritten rules as a personal attack. The first time I saw her, she was measuring the grass with a ruler outside someone's lawn and snapping a picture. I should have seen it then, but I was busy with court filings, Ava's new school paperwork, and trying to build a home she could feel safe in. Ava was everything to me. She had her mother's smile and my stubborn eyes, and the way she talked to butterflies and sidewalk ants made the world feel kind again. But that kindness was no defense against the monster lurking in pressed blazers and HOA bylaws. The first few weeks were relatively calm. Karen would make passive-aggressive comments if Ava left sidewalk chalk drawings on the community path, saying things like, "We aim to maintain standards here," or, "Not everyone wants to see doodles." I bit my tongue hard. Ava never drew anything obscene. She sketched suns, stars, and stick figures holding hands. I washed them off myself more than once just to avoid conflict. But I noticed something strange. Whenever I worked late or had an extended court appearance, Ava would get quieter the next day, like she was holding something back. One afternoon I caught her flinching when Karen walked by, and I knelt to ask her about it. She shook her head quickly. "She says I don't belong here," Ava whispered. "She says you don't either." That was when I started keeping my ears open. I installed a video doorbell with wide-angle coverage and made a habit of checking in on Ava more frequently during breaks in my schedule. But even then, I underestimated how fast everything could go from passive menace to irreversible horror. On the day that shattered everything, I had just finished delivering closing arguments in a multi-day human trafficking trial. I was exhausted, wearing the same suit from yesterday, and the verdict was due the next morning. I called home during my drive and Ava answered, cheerful, her voice small and chirpy. "I'm playing hopscotch," she said. "I drew a big one today. Want to see it later?" I smiled and told her I couldn't wait. That was the last normal moment. 10 minutes later, I got a call from a neighbor, Mrs. Ellington, an older woman who lived 2 houses down. Her voice was frantic, shaking with fear and disbelief. "It's Ava, there's been an accident. You need to come now." I floored the gas, breaking every traffic law I had ever enforced. When I arrived, Ava was already in the ambulance, limp and pale, her tiny frame covered in bruises. Blood ran from the corner of her mouth. I could barely process it. Karen stood nearby, holding a belt in her hand and talking to 2 HOA board members, her expression practiced, calm like a PR rep spinning a disaster. I stormed toward her, but a police officer blocked my path, recognizing me instantly. "Let us handle it, D." But I could see in his eyes, he didn't believe a word Karen was saying either. "She fell," Karen said loudly, clearly for the record. She was being reckless, unsupervised. I only came out when I heard the scream. But her story didn't add up. The way Ava's injuries looked, especially the pattern on her back, wasn't consistent with any fall. A paramedic whispered to me once Karen was out of earshot, "Sir, these look like defensive wounds." She was hit multiple times. Hard. My world fractured. In my line of work, I had seen horrors: abused children, battered women, cruel men who walked free on technicalities, but never did I think I would be standing at the intersection of grief and rage for my own daughter. I watched the ambulance speed away, sirens screaming, and I made a promise right there, standing in the hot sun next to Karen and her carefully rehearsed lies. She picked the wrong child and the wrong father. The hospital confirmed what I feared. Ava had suffered a concussion, internal bleeding, and a hairline skull fracture. The force used was blunt and deliberate. The marks on her body lined up not with a fall, but with repeated strikes. Someone had whipped her. I sat beside her unconscious body, holding her tiny hand, listening to the machines beep and breathe for her, while a wave of guilt crushed my chest. I wasn't there when she needed me, but I would be there for every moment now. I was no longer just a father. I was a hunter. When I returned to the neighborhood the next day, Karen was holding a clipboard, directing 2 teenagers to scrub the sidewalk chalk with a power washer. The drawing Ava made was gone, erased like she never existed. I walked straight to her. "I know what you did," I said, voice cold. She didn't blink. It's unfortunate, she said. But if you had been supervising your child properly, I stepped closer, my voice low. I'm the district attorney for this county. You assaulted my daughter. You're going to jail. She smiled, lips tight. Oh, you poor man, she said. You really don't understand how this works here. That was when I saw it clearly. Karen believed she was untouchable. She thought the HOA board protected her. That silence from neighbors wasn't fear of gossip. It was fear of her. I began to dig. I subpoenaed HOA meeting minutes, filed a request for any complaints against Karen in the last 5 years, and visited every house on our street. One by one the stories came out. A dog beaten with a rake for barking. A teenage boy shoved into a fence for skateboarding. An elderly woman evicted under shady accusations of blight. Karen wasn't just strict, she was violent. And she was protected. The HOA board members had personal ties. 2 were her cousins, 1 her ex-husband. And the police? Karen's brother-in-law was on the force. It all started to make sense. They'd buried complaints, threatened retaliation, turned neighbors into silent prisoners. But I wasn't afraid. I knew how to play this game better than anyone. I submitted my findings directly to the state's attorney general. I ordered forensic teams to reanalyze the belt Karen had dropped at the scene. We found Ava's DNA on it. I subpoenaed text messages from HOA board members that revealed the cover-up attempts. Say she tripped, DA's daughter or not, we stick together. The evidence was coming together like bricks in a wall, one that would seal Karen in for good. Meanwhile, Ava remained unconscious. I read to her every night, her favorite fairy tales, her favorite animal books. I told her what was happening. I told her Daddy was fighting for her, and that she didn't have to be afraid anymore. Nurses said sometimes children in comas can still hear. I hope she did. I needed her to know justice was coming. 2 days later she stirred. Her eyelids fluttered like tired wings, and then, barely above a whisper, she said, "Daddy?" I broke. I cried into her bedsheet, unable to speak. When the doctors came running, I asked only one question: will she remember? They said yes. Not everything, but something. Enough. I kissed her forehead and made another promise. Karen wasn't just going to be charged. She was going to be exposed, prosecuted, and made into a warning to every abusive, power-hungry tyrant hiding behind fake authority. The time for measured steps was over. I was bringing the law, not with polite papers but with thunder. The day Ava woke up, everything changed, not just for me as a father but as a man who had spent his career serving the law. Her little voice was weak and scratchy, and her hand barely clung to mine, but her eyes were clear and terrified. She remembered everything. Not just the beating, not just the blood on her dress or the belt across her skin. She remembered Karen's words. "Filthy little trespasser," she had called her. "Your daddy doesn't scare me. Rules apply to everyone, even worthless little girls." That last line wasn't just cruel, it was calculated. Meant to instill fear. And it worked. But only for a moment. Because as Ava lay recovering in that hospital bed, something deeper stirred in me than sorrow. It was fury. Controlled, focused, and sharpened like a blade. I didn't leave her bedside. Not once. While she slept, I used the hospital Wi-Fi to begin building the legal case that would raise Karen's world to the ground. When you're a district attorney, you know how to make things stick. Assault charges were only the beginning. I wanted every stone turned over. Every abuse of power brought into the light. Every resident she had silenced with intimidation, every child she had made cry, every lie she had filed under policy enforcement. I was going to dig it all up. By the time Ava was sipping apple juice the next morning, my team back at the DA's office already had marching orders. I wasn't just seeking justice for my daughter. I was declaring war on an entire corrupt HOA. We subpoenaed the HOA's financial records and emails. Within 72 hours, we discovered a slush fund, tens of thousands of dollars in community improvement expenses, that were either completely fabricated or sent to shell companies. My investigators traced the money to Karen's brother's construction company, an outfit that hadn't filed a building permit in 3 years. We also uncovered years of complaints lodged against Karen: verbal harassment, racial slurs, threats to evict single mothers over minor infractions. One woman had received a $200 fine for her son's bicycle being too loud. Another was threatened with eviction because her disabled father's wheelchair ramp didn't match the paint code. Every one of them had quietly paid or moved away, too afraid to push back. But they weren't afraid anymore. Not now. I called a public town hall meeting, invited every homeowner and broadcast it live. The room was packed, and the air felt like dry tinder waiting for a spark. What happened to my daughter, I said, was not just the result of one woman's cruelty. It was the result of a community that allowed cruelty to be normalized, because it wore a name tag and a laminated badge. I didn't scream. I didn't beg. I just laid the facts bare. That night the dam broke. A retired veteran stood up and recounted how Karen yelled at his granddaughter for playing with chalk too aggressively. A black father choked back tears as he explained how Karen told him he didn't belong in the community park. One by one, victims of her tyranny found their voice. And then came the tipping point. Karen's own cousin, a former HOA board member, stood and said, "I can't stay quiet anymore," then handed me a thumb drive full of archived emails. What we read was nauseating. Karen referred to residents as ferals, inbred yokels, welfare roaches, and in one message about Ava, wrote, "Some kids are born to ruin nice neighborhoods. Better they learn early who's in charge." That line became the rallying cry of our movement. The monster had unmasked herself. But I wasn't going to leave it to hearsay. I wanted a lawful takedown. We brought in a forensic accountant, and by week's end, we had documented evidence of criminal fraud, conspiracy, and abuse of power. I reached out to state troopers instead of the local sheriff. Karen's brother-in-law still worked there, and coordinated her arrest with full media presence. Karen was picked up at her home in her pristine flower garden, still in heels and a blazer. She smirked at the cameras until she saw me standing beside the lead officer. "You're using your position to destroy me," she spat as the cuffs snapped shut. "This is personal." "No," I said, staring into her eyes. "This is justice. You made it personal when you laid hands on my child." The formal charges included aggravated child abuse, assault with a deadly weapon, conspiracy to falsify public documents, and financial fraud exceeding $50,000. But that was only the criminal side. I opened a civil case the same week. And I wasn't alone. 15 families signed on within 24 hours. Eventually, we filed a class action lawsuit with over 60 plaintiffs. Her world was collapsing brick by brick. But what I didn't expect, what I couldn't have foreseen, was how this case echoed far beyond our neighborhood. I began receiving emails from across the state. Other parents. Other HOs. People sharing stories of unchecked suburban power plays, of minor disputes turning into bullying campaigns, of innocent kids punished under the guise of property values. We had struck a national nerve. I proposed a statewide bill, the Community Oversight and Protection Act. It mandated background checks for all HOA board members, implemented financial audits, and created a reporting hotline for abuse, with whistleblower protection. The governor's office called me personally. "We're watching your case closely," he said. "The footage of your daughter broke our hearts. The law should never protect people like that woman." But through it all, I never lost sight of Ava. Her recovery was slow. There were nightmares. She'd flinch at the sound of loud voices or belts being unbuckled. But we were healing together. One afternoon she asked me, "Daddy, is the bad lady still out there?" I knelt beside her. "She's locked up, baby. And she'll never hurt anyone again." We started painting chalk murals together. Bright, happy ones. Unicorns and rainbows that stretched across our block. Other kids joined in. Parents smiled. The fear that once choked our street had lifted. Karen's house, once a symbol of fear, now sat empty and condemned. The board was dismantled. A new one was voted in, this time by real community members. With transparency, elections, and oversight. When Karen's trial began, I recused myself from prosecution. I sat in the front row every day with Ava beside me. The jury watched Ava's body cam footage, her medical reports, the 911 call she managed to make before she collapsed. Her tiny, terrified voice echoed through the courtroom. "Help me, please, she's hitting me." I didn't do anything. Karen's stone facade shattered. She wept. But it was too late. She wasn't crying for Ava. She was crying because her reign had ended. The jury returned a unanimous verdict. Guilty. Maximum sentence. No parole. She was taken out in cuffs, not as a neighborhood queen, but as a convicted child abuser. As the courtroom erupted in applause, a neighbor I barely knew hugged me and whispered, "You didn't just save your daughter. You saved us all." And maybe I had. Not because I was a hero, but because I refused to be silent. Because I chose justice when everyone else chose peace. Because I was the law. And the law, when wielded right, remembers the smallest victims. And strikes back. Karen's conviction was only the beginning of what would come to be known in the media as the HOA reckoning. After the trial, I found myself at the center of a growing national conversation about unchecked HOA authority and the dangerous ways power gets abused behind picket fences and manicured lawns. But for me, it never stopped being about Ava. Her laughter was slowly returning, her gait steadier as she ran across the front yard. The bruises faded, but I knew trauma had no timeline. So I made blueberry pancakes every Sunday. Held her hand through thunderstorms. I stayed present. We rebuilt the world that Karen tried to destroy in one vicious afternoon. Across the country, something awakened. Victims of HOA abuse, some silent for decades, began to speak out. Lawsuits mounted. Law firms built entire divisions to defend homeowners against rogue boards. A senator introduced a bill using language I helped draft. They called it Ava's Law, and when it passed, the president signed it with Ava's name on the pen. We framed the signed bill and hung it in her room, right above her chalkboard. She called it her shield. Karen's civil trial came next. Her assets were frozen, her home auctioned, and the money directed to victims she'd hurt. It was never about the cash. It was about peeling away every layer of her false authority. Her cruelty had hidden behind policies, her violence disguised by bylaws. Now, stripped of all that, she was just another coward held accountable. Her defense team tried to argue she had qualified immunity as an HOA board member. The judge laughed. That might apply to a noise complaint, he said, not to beating a 5-year-old into a coma. But there was more to fix. I worked with the new HOA board to rewrite the bylaws, disband arbitrary committees, and form a resident-led oversight council. The HOA office became a transparency hub. People felt human again, not like subjects living under Karen's rule. At Halloween, for the first time in years, kids roamed the sidewalks. Parents opened their porches. Ava dressed as a little prosecutor, toy briefcase in hand. She said, "Daddy, I'm gonna put the next Karen in jail too." I laughed until I cried. Not everyone was happy. One day, a woman stood in my driveway with a sign, "You ruined my sister's life." Karen's sibling. She screamed about corruption, called Ava a liar. I didn't yell back. I just handed her the court transcripts and said, "This is the truth. Do what you will with it." A week later, she emailed me to apologize. She hadn't known the details. Hadn't seen the evidence. Her message ended with, "I hope Ava heals. I'm sorry she suffered." Ava returned to school with a private security escort I funded personally. Not because we feared another Karen, but because I refused to let any institution pretend her safety wasn't their problem. The school, shaken by her story, overhauled its policies. Cameras went up. Staff were retrained. A permanent child safety liaison was installed. One girl's trauma forced an entire district to change. Eventually, I stepped away from the DA's office, not out of fatigue but purpose. I launched a nonprofit, the Ava Foundation for Community Justice. Our goal was simple: defend families from HOA abuse, offer legal aid, fund therapy for victims. Within 6 months, we had offices in 4 states. One single mother in Nevada wrote, "They tried to evict me for putting a wheelchair ramp on my porch. Your foundation saved us." Donations poured in. Not from the elite, but from the people Karen and others like her had tried to silence. We were asked to participate in a documentary. Ava gave permission, even narrated a few lines. Her tiny voice ended the film with, "I got hurt, but I didn't get broken. I'm not scared of bullies anymore." When it aired, she looked at me and asked, "Do you think Karen saw that?" I told her I hoped so. Because from behind bars, Karen needed to see the girl she tried to destroy, and how miserably she had failed. There's a stillness that follows justice. Not joy, not relief, but peace. We planted a tree in the neighborhood park, a red maple. Ava picked it. She said it looked strong and bright. A bronze plaque beneath it reads, "For every child who ever felt too small to fight back, you are stronger than you think." The night we installed it, we held a candlelight vigil. Not to remember pain, but to celebrate resilience. Dozens of families came. Some brought letters. Others just stood in silence. We lit an extra candle for every victim of HOA abuse in the country. There were too many. But we lit them anyway. Then Ava took the mic, holding her chalkboard in one hand. "I forgive her," she said. Not because she said sorry, but because I don't want to carry her anger anymore. It's heavy. And I want to be light. The crowd went completely still. My throat closed. Not because I was sad, but because I realized my daughter was braver than I had ever been. Karen's house was demolished and turned into a community garden. Ava visits often. She plants flowers and sometimes leaves notes. One of them read, "You tried to break me. I grew back stronger." I hope one day you do too. So no, this story doesn't end with a courtroom verdict or a prison sentence. It ends with a little girl, bruised but unbroken, who stood back up and roared louder than the hatred that tried to silence her. A 5-year-old who taught a neighborhood, a courtroom, a state, and a nation what real justice looks like. And I, as her father, and as district attorney, will never let her voice be silenced again.